Glen Wood has started a movement driving business and governmental growth through parental rights and workplace equity. He's the author of Too Big to Care, Adopt Sustainable Business Practices, or Embrace Defeat. Welcome to the show, Glenn.
Thanks very much, George. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Tell us a little about your personal life, some more about your work, and why you do what you do.
Sure. Well, um, my current focus is on parental rights, as you mentioned, and I didn't choose this track, to be honest, George. I was in financial services for about 20 years, working on Wall Street and various firms in Asia as well as in North America and Europe. About 10 years ago, when my son was born, it was an emergency situation. The hospital was calling, it was life or death. We weren't sure if he was going to make it or not. I approached my management team and asked for a little bit of time off to spend with family to be there in case my son passed away. They basically rejected that, and eventually they fired me for taking that time because I left. So that's where this movement began. And I believe with my whole heart that in 2025, one of the keys to making any business thrive or to making any government work for that matter is to focus on people and is to focus on people's right to have not only a career but to have a family.
What a crazy idea. Get
Exactly.
out of here with that, Glenn. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Family, kids. That's outlandish. And
And
this
that's
this
exactly how I felt, George, as I was writing this book. I often had some of these kind of weird, kind of epiphany moments where I thought, does this really have to be said? And at the end of the day, the answer was yes. So the book is too big to care. I hope it adds value. It can serve as kind of a guidebook to how to make your business thrive in 2025. It's completely apolitical, so it goes right down the center. I believe that no matter who you are, no matter what side of the aisle you are on, that parental rights matters. And if we don't allow people to have, like I said, both a family and a career, no matter who they are, then we're in trouble. And any talk of sustainability or ESG or SDGs or whatever you want to call it has to begin there. And in fact, I believe that's where profitability begins as a business.
Well, I think that that's all reasonable. Where did you grow up, Glenn?
So I grew up in a small town. Actually, I was born on a farm outside of Toronto, Canada. And from there, I was originally a musician, and so I did a lot of piano work and music work as a young person, which originally brought me to Asia, and then I went into financial services after I graduated from Wharton with my MBA, and and then this is the 10th anniversary actually of when I was fired from my job at Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley. And I just feel like there's so much work to be done in this area. I started my own company now about 7 years ago, which is a logistics company. But again, we're focused on these principles. It's called Smart Vision Logistics. I welcome you and your listeners to take a look at the webpage. But we focus on building the business around these very basic, sustainable business practices, which to some might sound like, oh, that's that far left crap again. And that's not what we're talking about here, George. We're talking about how to make your business succeed, how to make your business more profitable, making sure that you're an ongoing concern in 2025 and hitting that baseline. That's what the book's about. That's what my mission's about.
Well, that all seems very reasonable. So this took place in Japan?
That's right. So this took place in Japan, and a lot of the examples I gave in the book are actually examples from Japan, although I include global examples as well. I believe, however, the reason I didn't publish the book in Japanese first, it will be coming in Japanese, but it's simply because I believe this is a global issue. This isn't a Japanese issue. It's not a U.S. issue. It's not a European issue. This is a global issue. If we don't treat people right, if we don't give them an opportunity to have both a family and a career, if we don't realize that hey, harassment's not really an effective form of management, that we really don't have a way forward. And actually, it's at that point I think capitalism crumbles. And I mentioned that in the book as well, that I really believe the heart of capitalism is kind of twofold. It's creating businesses and corporations that generate outsized profits while at the same time are adding extraordinary value to society. And unfortunately, some of our businesses globally have kind of forgotten the second part of that contract.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds like it. And in your case, clearly. Is it your experience, belief that this is, and I'm interested in zeroing in on your experience and then just kind of going out from there. Was it because you're a dad and not a mom? Did that play into it, or is that not relevant?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's ironic, actually, that Japan has some of the best laws on the books in terms of parental rights globally. So whether you're a mom or a dad in Japan, you have right by law to take a year off when your child's born. And it doesn't matter whether you're a mom or a dad. And it doesn't even matter if you're adopting a child, you still have the same legal right. The fact of the matter is, though, George, is that most companies just completely ignore the law.
Hmm.
And if anybody puts up their hand to take paternity leave in this case, they just get fired. And women are highly discouraged from even becoming pregnant. And you've probably heard the stories, the nightmare stories of the bosses creating a calendar of when women are able to have children in the company so that they stagger it so that it, quote, doesn't affect business. These are the types of practices that really are destroying businesses today and that are destroying families. In Japan, we see a dire demographic situation where the population is now decreasing by 1 million per year because I believe largely because corporations aren't allowing people to have a family. And it just seems so strange to even say such a thing, because I believe that that's extraordinarily non-sustainable behavior. What you get is this death spiral, George, of employees that aren't motivated, customers that aren't wanting to deal with you because they know how poorly you treat your employees, investors that don't want to give you investment dollars because obviously you don't meet their ESG criteria. At the end of the day, your cost of capital goes up and your profits go down, and over the long run, you're going to fail. So whether you're a greedy capitalist and just are worried about the bottom line, or whether you really care about developing your people, in either case, you're going to fail if you don't follow these kind of basic principles, I think, for business in 2025.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes sense. From just the short amount of time that we spent together, I'm mildly surprised to hear that this took place at a company as large as I think you said Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley, which I imagine is a very, very large company. My guess would have been if there's laws in place that would have been a smaller organization trying to run afoul and take advantage of employees versus a big one, but my assumption would have been wrong.
Ironically, again, I think what you find in Japan is largely, and perhaps around the world, is that you have these large organizations. That's the title of the book, Too Big to Care, right? You have these large organizations that kind of operate above the law, that actually believe, and in many cases are right in assuming that what they do, because they're so important to society. And we face this same thing with Too Big to Fail, Andrew Ross Sorkin's book that we saw back in the global financial crisis. When you get corporations that are so big that without them society is going to stumble, then somehow these corporations operate above the law. And unfortunately, we see that as a reality. I think that reality is changing rather quickly, especially with things like Glassdoor and the transparency we see on the internet, where people as individuals have kind of now the opportunity to stand up and say, hey, this is what happened to me. I'd steer clear of this XYZ company. In that case, companies then will find it more difficult to hire good people. They'll find that their attrition rates actually start to creep up because employees realize that the grass is actually greener on the other side of the street. And so these are all the things that I highlight in the book as being kind of the baseline for your business in 2025 in order to succeed. You have to realize that this isn't your dad's Oldsmobile. That we've got a new situation where it's transparent, where employees have a choice, where getting back to the old principles, like we talked about at the beginning of this discussion, if people can't have a family and a career, well, you're going to have a problem. And I think in the Wild West, when you had a little grocery store in the center of town, everybody knew what was going on. So if the boss turned around and fired somebody when they got pregnant, well, the locals would be angry and they wouldn't come and shop at your grocery store, right? Unfortunately, we've had to create systems like Glassdoor and whatnot to try and correct this system of companies ignoring, again, the second half of this contract where they're supposed to be adding extraordinary value to society, and they think they can skip the line. and just focus on profits, well, that's going to hang you as a company in 2025.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree. How pervasive are these problems?
Well, when I started my movement 10 years ago, the paternity leave laws and maternity leave laws, for that matter, in Japan were in place in the 80s. So these are laws that have been around for decades. And yet, if you looked at the number of men when I started my case in Japan taking paternity leave was something like 1%. And when you ask men why they didn't take it, everybody gave you the same answer, George. Well, it's just unacceptable. I'd be fired right away. I'd be treated, as a treason, as a treasonous person for even thinking of such a thing. And we're very grateful that today we see those numbers well above 30% in Japan. So we've also seen the Japanese government step up and change the laws further to make it more difficult for companies to escape these types of laws. So we've seen really good progress. I think around the world, we've still got a long ways to go. As you know, in North America, in many places, we don't even have a maternity leave standardization law, which really puts women in a precarious position, right? And we talk about equity, we talk about women in management, and then we don't even have a standardized maternity leave program. You know, something's not quite right. And this kind of disingenuous way of dealing with the problem is something, again, I think both politicians and corporate leaders are going to face head on going forward. And it's something that they need to realize before it smacks them in the face.
Is it common for other countries to have a standardized policy on maternity and paternity leave?
So we see a variety of situations around the world from, kind of the best are probably Northern Europe and Scandinavian countries where we've got both maternity and paternity leave numbers extraordinarily high to situations, in many African countries or some South American countries where you've got no standardized maternity leave, no standardized paternity leave. And the mantra still seems to be just kind of get the employees in and work them till they die. And uh, that might have worked 40 or 50 years ago. I'm not sure to a greater or lesser extent. What I'm saying in the book, however, is that going forward, unfortunately or fortunately, that's not going to work anymore. And if you really are focused on succeeding as a business, if you want happy customers that are your fans, if you want to maximize your utilization of your capital, both human capital, resource capital, financial capital, you need to focus on these basic principles. And I tried to be very simple and highlight them in the book. Kind of, this is kind of the bottom line.
It is a kind of a sad commentary when we do have such a focus on equity and DEI and closing the wealth gap, and there's just so many different things, long list, but nowhere talked about is this at all. And it's such a fundamental thing. Everything you've been talking about makes all the sense in the world to me. I want to have a family and a career. I want to work hard, but I'm working hard in service of my family. It's not the opposite.
Exactly. And like I said, sometimes as I was writing the book, I had to really pinch myself and say, does this really need to be said? Do I really need to write this? And the fact is I did, and I did write it, and I think I was called to write it, and I think someone needs to say it. That this is really basic stuff. And the irony of this whole thing, George, is if you think about all the money that corporations spend on coaching and on developing managers, well, what better management training is there than becoming a parent? It's
None finer.
it's the absolute top of the top, cream of the crop, the gold standard in becoming a manager. I've never had better managers in my career than people that have several kids at home. And there's a reason for that. And being a father myself, I understand that very well. That if you know how to deal with 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, if you've gone through that experience of having those in your of raising children and having dealing with those types of situations on a daily basis, 24/7, 365, what better management training is that? And do you want those people back in your company managing your people? Of course you do. And if you're going to go out in the market and try and hire those people and retain those people, do you know how much that's going to cost? So yeah, have children, enjoy, have a great family, have as many as you want. We're going to support you. And likewise, we want you to come back and bring your experiences back into the company and manage our company and manage our people with the experiences you've had. There's nothing better than that. And you can't buy that, George. You can't buy that type of training. So why would we discourage that? Why would we be so short-sighted as to say that anybody who, well, she has to leave at 3 o'clock to go pick up her kids, so we're going to fire her. What kind of weird, short-sighted, ignorant thinking is that? It just doesn't make sense for either the bottom line or the top line or it just doesn't belong in business anymore, frankly. And if it does end up in business, I think you're going to find a lot of these businesses failing, unfortunately. They're not going to make it. And I would say the same thing for countries and cultures. And I think we're seeing that in places like Japan today with the incredible decline we've had in Japan over the past 30 years that's actually accelerating at this point. You've got women in leadership numbers, George, in Japan, ranked 122nd in the world. Right next to Yemen is where the women in management numbers are in Japan today. It's time for change. It's time for change in the workplace. It's time for change in government and the way we think about parental rights today, George.
I wonder if you did some kind of a Venn diagram of or whatever it might be, big organizations that refer to their employees as family, but then treat them in a completely different way than you would that sort of what you're talking about. So some of the
Absolutely.
some of
And
the
unfortunately, we see a lot of that today, George. It's something we call greenwashing, and I've highlighted it in the book. And I just mentioned 2 points on the back of that. One, greenwashing. Again, it might have worked 10 years ago. We had the whole CSR movement sweep through our global corporations. And at the end of the day, what CSR largely turned out to be is a nice color brochure that we hand out to investors. And unfortunately, that's not where it's at. Second, I highlight in the book that we need to exercise a lot of caution around these movements because what happens is politicians grab onto them and turn them into political movements instead of actually doing something. So we see that around ESG. The whole concept of ESG is right on track. And in fact, if you look historically, corporations that are extraordinarily successful have adopted these ESG principles long ago. So we turn it into this ESG movement. Okay, fine, let's focus on it. But let's focus on it with our focus on results, not on politics. And unfortunately, when you turn it into a political movement, it quickly turns into a very destructive instrument, actually. And I warn of that in the book that these aren't political movements. And that's why I made it clear from the outset of our conversation that this isn't a left or right issue. This is something that goes not only across the aisle, it goes around the world. If people aren't allowed to have a family and a career, no matter who you are, it's going to create problems. It's non-sustainable behavior. And it's written in SDGs, it's written in ESG, but unfortunately, we love to take these things and put them in a little box and use them as political tools. And that's where we really stumble. And that's where we end up not getting the results that we'd hoped for.
yeah, I'm confident you give this an enormous amount of thought. The name of the book is obviously Too Big to Care. So you're looking at massive companies, and then you've got mom and pop organizations and small to mid-size and da 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 da. How or do you see an opportunity within one of those size companies over the next? How are you thinking about that?
I think the opportunities are across the gamut, George. And again, I did some research into this in terms of, okay, is it more important for a large corporation to do this or a small corporation, or does this have to be top down or bottom up? And the conclusion of that research is no, that anybody can do this. And in fact, you can start. I wrote the book so simply that I'm hopeful that even junior high school kids can pick this up and get the message that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, it doesn't matter whether you're the president of the United States or whether you're a startup company in Silicon Valley. If you're not doing these things in 2025, you're going to run into problems. And again, they're very, very simple, basic principles. And I hope that people by adopting these learn that yeah, the bottom line in capitalism is kind of the bottom line. It's what you got to aim for. If you don't have bottom line numbers, you're not going to survive. But at the same time, how do you get there? Well, you work with people. It's all about people. If you're not developing your people, if you're not hiring the best and the brightest and training them and helping them and then letting them go and letting them do their job without micromanaging them and allowing them to have basic human rights like a family and a career, then no, you're not going to succeed. And in fact, you're not going to have that bottom line. So go out and embrace both. Add that value. Maximize your bottom line. It's not that complicated.
And with that, Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. I think that that's a great way to bring our conversation to a close. Where can people learn more? You've got a movement and you've collected a lot of signatures. And finally, where can people get their copy of Too Big to Fail, Adopt Sustainable Business Practices, or Embrace Defeat?
Thanks so much, George. So we've been really, really fortunate. Best-selling book across many categories on Amazon, internationally, in fact, in Japan and the U.S. and Canada and around the world. So please take a look on Amazon. It's also on Apple Books, etc. But again, the title of the book is Too Big to Care. We have to embrace sustainable business practices, or we will embrace defeat. We have a website. You can find it at glenwoodparentalrights.com. Please take a look. My LinkedIn is very active, and I post regularly on LinkedIn. You'll find me there on just at Glen Wood. And again, as you mentioned, we have a petition on Too Big to Care. We've got, I think, 30,000 some signatures on there. The whole idea, again, George, is to wake people up and have them focus on the fact that both individuals, I think a lot of individuals kind of get this kind of on the heart level, but unfortunately, it really hasn't seeped into our societies and our governments. So I'm hopeful through our movement, and then with your help and your listeners' help, that pick up a copy of the book, leave a review on Amazon, and let's move this forward.
Movements are never done, Glenn. More work for sure. Well, if you enjoyed this as
Absolutely.
much as I did, show Glenn your appreciation and share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas and who is aligned with the values that Glenn has been talking about. And I'm confident that it's most of us. Pick up your copy of Too Big to Care on Amazon and Apple. I will list those in the notes of the show. And then go to glenwoodsparentalrights.com.
GlenwoodParentalRights.com. Yeah.
GlenwoodParentalRights.com. Check out everything he's working on there. Connect with him on LinkedIn as well. I'll put all those in the notes of the show. Thanks again, Glenn.
Thanks very much, George. Great to be here today.
Okay, great talking with you. Until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.